Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about how to dominate your fantasy football auction draft in the 2024 season.
Hike!
All right, Joe. So we're going to be talking about how to dominate your auction draft for the 2024 season. We're going to start off with nomination strategy. Nomination is a big part of auctions if you haven't been a part of them before. So, Joe, do you think it's better to nominate guys you want or guys you don't want?
I think there's times for both. I think at certain times, if especially if you want to kind of know a value of a player and you don't want to wait for him, I think it's best to nominate him even if you do want him. But I think there's also certain points. Maybe you've spent some of your money already, and you see a bunch of people that have some money. Maybe you nominate somebody you don't, and that you know is going to go for a decent amount of money. Get some of that money off the table, so they kind of come back to your level playing field a little bit. So I don't, I was at a point where I was just strictly nominating guys I don't want until later in the draft, obviously, when I had to nominate guys I wanted. But I've been changing it up a little bit more and actually nominating guys early that I do want.
I feel similar to you. I used to always nominate people I don't want. That was
Right.
my standard. Because I always kind of had the back of my head that if I nominated the person I want and then I'm bidding on the player, then people around me should know, like, oh, well, Steve wants this guy. Right.
Right.
So then it's like you're going to put yourself in a corner. If someone's going to price enforce, then you're kind of stuck. Right. That's the part where I get concerned. But I agree with you. There's times to nominate people that you do want and times you don't. I think for times you don't, I already have, let's say, a top running back. I'm not going to get a second running back. I want to clear the deck a little bit. So I'm going to nominate a top running back, kind of get some more cash flow out. In times where you should nominate, I think there's times where you're better off nominating and just getting it out of the way. Like you're waiting and waiting and waiting and hoping that, okay, when this player comes up, I'll get him for a good value. But more than likely, it's probably not going to happen because somebody else is going to want that person too. And then there's no other options available for them to pivot. So now they have to get that guy, and now you're stuck.
That's happened to me plenty. That's kind of why I've had to adjust my strategies, because I was, for the longest time just nominating guys I don't want. And then I just sit there all draft waiting for this one guy. Then he finally comes out. And I know over the years, you and I got into some epic battles for some mid-tier wide receivers that it was just like, we got to get this guy.
Absolutely. So how about nominating for defense and kicker? Maybe this isn't relevant to some. It seems like they're a dying breed. A lot of fantasy leagues are trying to get rid of them. We can't vote it out for whatever reason in your league, but maybe one day. Do you like to nominate them early? There's some value to say, like, hey, if you nominate them, then hopefully maybe if somebody does bid on them, then they're spending $1 or $2 extra than they should. Because you would think that, hey, they really only should be $1, or is it kind of a waste of a nomination? There's some strategy in who you nominate, especially early on in the draft.
Yeah, I used to do this, and my first nomination, whether it was didn't matter where I was in a nomination order, I would try to get my first couple of nominations would always be defense kicker, trying to get that for $1, and then figuring if anyone outbids me for $1, then they're paying more than $1. But I just found over the years that I'm not doing that anymore because, like you said, it's kind of a waste of a nomination. And then it's like, does it really matter if somebody else early in the draft spends like $1 or $2 more on a defense or a kicker than you early on? So I've been fading that strategy.
Yeah, I think I did. I think I've realized the importance of nominating.
Right.
And I really think that by doing that, you're kind of throwing your nomination away.
Yeah, that's what I agree. And that's just, lessons learned and doing this over the years that I've really faded that.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So speaking of nominating, who would you nominate early for a price check?
Yeah, a player I would do is wide receiver A.J. Brown. Currently his value is sitting at $45. And I know we've done several mock drafts, and I've just seen his price exponentially go above the $45. If say Tyreek Hill's already off the board, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and he's kind of, kind of the next guy up. And then people are like, oh man, I missed out on those three wide receivers. And then AJ Brown's, well into the 50s and sometimes surpassing, like a Tyreek Hill, for instance. So I'd like to get him out there early before the other wide receivers and see if I can't get him more towards his value.
Interesting. Yeah, for me, I'm going to be nominating wide receiver Malik Neighbors. Guy has been probably the hottest player going right now. If you just pull up X, you're going to see some highlight of Malik Neighbors in Giants training camp. So if you really want this guy, just be prepared. You're going to have to spend up for him, but don't wait. If you're going to wait to nominate him once a lot of these guys are gone, you're going to have to spend even more. So right now he's going for $18 as far as an auction value is concerned. So if you nominate him, I don't know if you're going to get him for that, but at least you nominate him early and if he goes for 28, 29, 30, okay, back off. Pivot and go
Right.
somewhere else. But if you're like, oh, I'm going to wait and get Malik Neighbors, and he finally comes up 60 net picks after people have been, 60 picks after, the players have been distributed, you're toast.
Yeah, honestly, I would follow that same advice for a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. Even just these rookies that have the buzz and they're the new hotness of the leagues right now, and guys are going to want them. And like you said, I think it's better to know what their value is, and you can either grab them at a value you're comfortable with, or at least you know how much it costs and you can pivot.
So let's talk about some bidding strategies. So one that we actually been talking about recently, I don't know if there's a certain term for it. I call it jump the shark. So I guess that's a negative connotation, but you're talking about when the bidding goes from 1, 2, 3, and then it jumps. So let's say 25. Somebody jumps it up. Now I'm not talking. I know you're gonna say, "Well, I want to move the draft along. I'll bump it up." I'm not talking like Tyreek Hill and you're bumping it from 5 to 30, right? I'm talking like maybe you're bidding on a guy like AJ Brown and you put him up at 50. His value's in like the 40s, right? We said he was 45, I think you said from
Yep.
earlier. Yeah, 45. So let's say you jump it up to 50. Would you ever do that? Is there value in doing that? Like, what's your thoughts there?
I think there could be value. It depends. I don't do that just because I would be afraid that I'm just purposely almost I could be bidding against myself essentially by pricing it too high, but there could be times where hey, you price it right and you get them and maybe stops some back and forth, but my worry would be like I do, bump up AJ Brown to say $55 and then it's like if nobody's bidding against me and I just win them right, then I'm like, did I just spend too much? How much more did I overspend? I think it would leave me with questions.
Yeah, I guess if you felt really confident about your price point and you said,
Yeah.
I feel really good about that, I'm just going to jump right up to that point. I mean, that's very interesting. I'm with you because I feel like, am I spending too much? Could I have saved a few dollars? But I do think you could spook somebody, right? Like if you're all of a sudden, like the bidding starts 1, 2, 3, then it goes to 52 for AJ Brown. It's like, you got to think a little bit like,
Well,
do I
the
want
other
to go
thing
53?
the other thing I feel like you got to be careful is when you're the person bidding like that. Sometimes I'm just smashing that bid button trying to get my bid in, and I
Oh, yeah.
don't realize that the price has jumped. And then next thing you know, you do have like $53 in AJ Brown. You're like, whoa, whoa, whoa! I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah, that's the nightmare situation
But
because then it's like, up, too bad for you.
yeah, the one strategy I do in terms of um, trying to jump up will be now it's not as drastic as you're talking about jumping the shark, as you'd say. But if I do want a player, I've been going back and forth. I'm not afraid to go like $2 to $3 more and just see if I that's not enough to spook
Mhm.
the guy and hopefully win them. I'm hoping that if I do $2 or $3, they're not just willing to, do another dollar more. Um, versus just going dollar for dollar back and forth.
All right, Joe. So, as far as tips go, what is your number one tip out there for those who are watching this episode?
Yeah, and this is a tip because it's something that I've fallen victim to before, and we would recommend everybody, draft in terms of tiers. So my tip is goes right alongside of that, and it's don't wait for a guy that you want, and don't let him wait till he's the last player of a tier, because you're not the only one sitting there waiting for that guy to come up, and then you're going to create a bidding war. I know you and I, when you had an epic battle for like Amari Cooper and Keenan Allen, they were kind of the last guys in a tier, and we thought we were going to get values on them, but we both had a decent amount of money, and all of a sudden we have a bidding war, and you're overspending for these guys just because you're afraid to miss out on that tier level, and you want a tier 3 guy, but you're not the only one, and you're just I would try to avoid that, and the way to avoid that would be, start nominating once you see somebody's tiers go like in the top or even bottom. Try nominating those middle guys and see if you can't just avoid the last couple of guys of a tier.
Or even honestly, if you have a guy who you like at the bottom, like let's say you like Garrett Wilson, let's say he's kind of at the bottom of like that tier 2-ish type area,
Yeah.
right? I would just say nominate him earlier when you start seeing some
Right.
of those top receivers. Because yes, he's at the bottom of the tier, but it's really he's the last man standing in that tier. And and everybody else sees that and they're like, I can't afford to not have this guy because
Right.
look who's available. And that's what drives up the price. Because
Exactly.
it's a supply and demand, right? And
Yeah.
then the supply is dwindling.
Yep.
So my number one tip is going to be watch the bidding values early in your draft. I think sometimes the best values you can get is honestly in the first round, if you will, right? The first, if you're in a 12-team league, the first 12 players that are nominated. So if you're seeing that, some of the top dogs, like a Christian McCaffrey, like a Brees Hall, like a Jamar Chase, if they're going at their price or more, then that later on in the draft, you're probably going to see some values. If you see like, okay, they're going for maybe their price or lower, it's like, okay, you better spend up a little bit earlier because people are going to have more money and there's going to be some overspending. So I think that's the thing with an auction draft. You can't hit the snooze button. Like in a
Right.
snake draft, you wait until your next pick is like, oh, I'm up. Okay, what's going on? Right? You can't do that. Like you really got to keep your head on a swivel. You got to follow what's going on in the draft. And as you're kind of monitoring these prices, you've got to start pivoting.
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, we saw that just in that last mock draft that we did. We saw that exact scenario where, the top 3 wide receivers off the board were values, and then all the wide receivers after that were just going way higher. And some even, beat CeeDee Lambs and
Surpassed
Tyreek
them.
Hills of the world and
Yeah.
surpassed them. So it just shows you the craziness. A lot of times, those first few players you can definitely get good values on.
So speaking of those expensive players, who's the one guy, Joe, that you're paying up for? We talk about, conserving money, but then you also got to spend it. So who's that guy?
Yeah, I'd like to spend up and get Brees Hall. He's currently sitting at $52. And, now with McCaffrey and his whole calf thing, I think Brees Hall, I think even with a healthy McCaffrey, he had a chance, but I think now he really does. I think he's got a really good chance to be the RB1 on the season. And I'd be willing to spend up on him. And if Rodgers can stay healthy this whole year, I know that's a big if, but I just think this offense is going to look completely different. And Brees Hall could definitely be a beneficiary of that.
Yeah, so if the guy I'm spending up for is going to be wide receiver CeeDee Lamb, right now his auction value price is around $60. So you're going to have to spend up for the guy. But, we always talk about it, Joe. When they're in a contract year, they're going to ball out so they can cash out. So I think he's got extra incentive to do well. And look at the Cowboys team in general. It's kind of bare bones in my view. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not really an additional weapon. I mean, I know you like Brandon Cooks, but even he was a disappointment last year. And then they've got Jake Ferguson. He's okay. Tony Pollard's no longer there. They've got an aging Ezekiel Elliott. So, CeeDee Lamb is the number one target there. And I tend to like those offenses because CeeDee Lamb is too talented of a player to basically be, blanketed the whole game. He's going to show up. He's going to get his. So to me, I really like CeeDee Lamb for a variety of reasons. So he's a guy in my view that is worth spending up for.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it really is just honestly Dak and CeeDee Lamb for what the Cowboys are rolling out there, and nobody could stop it last year. Not sure why this year would be any different.
Because, like, like you could say, well, why not you go for a guy like Chase or with Tyreek Hill? At least with Tyreek Hill, I mean, you've got a guy like Waddle, who there's no type of Waddle player in Dallas to compete with CeeDee Lamb. Or with Jamar Chase, you've got T. Higgins. There's nobody that competes like that in Dallas. There's no T. Higgins
Right.
equivalent. So
Yeah.
to me, it's like he's the guy.
Yeah, he certainly is.
Well, on the flip side, Joe, who are you avoiding at all costs?
Yeah, this might come to a surprise to you, Steve, but as much as I like this guy, I'm going with tight end Sam Laporta. Just for the sheer fact that he's right now his value is 25. I don't really like to spend up for tight ends, but especially guys coming off of a really good year, and I know it was just a really, a great rookie year that he had as well. But we know, as we keep saying, touchdowns being that sticky stat. He had 10 last year. I am expecting a touchdown regression. So I think $25 is just too much, and you're just paying up for his stats from last year. And if he can't recreate it, especially the touchdowns, you're going to be disappointed. And for as much as some of the criticism Dalton Kincaid got, especially when Dawson Knox was out or in, he had similar stats to Sam Laporta, but one of the main differences was Kincaid had 2 touchdowns, Laporta had 10. And if you would have given Kincaid those 10 touchdowns, he would have been right there as a tight end 1 as well. So just kind of how those touchdowns can really sway, especially at that tight end position where everyone's so close. I just don't think he's going to be $25 more, worth $25 more than another player at the tight end position.
Yeah, he's a void for me as well. For a lot of the reasons that you said, why are you paying up for something that it could be very hard to repeat? I struggle with that.
Yeah.
So the guy I'm avoiding at all costs, this probably comes no surprise to you, Joe, is running back Christian McCaffrey. Right now, average auction value, you're looking at $69. And I think that's the problem for me. You're going to have to spend up to get this guy. And I understand if you had him last year, you probably won your league. And I do think sometimes it only takes 1 or 2 guys. If you get one of those 2 guys, you might win your league. And McCaffrey was one of those players. And with that, Brandon Ayuk might no longer be there, so the offense may rely even more on McCaffrey. With the calf issue now that he has, I don't know if that's going to nag him the rest of the season. I just think it's just an extreme gamble that you're taking, and I would rather go for a more safer, right? McCaffrey might be better, but in my view, I would rather spend less and get someone who I think is safer, like Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson, versus getting a guy like McCaffrey. So that to me is where I like the player. I just think the value right now is just astronomical.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, honestly, for the mock drafts that we've done, he's been going for more than the $69 as well. So that was before the injury. I don't know how much that drives down his cost, but like you said, his risk factor goes way up with that injury. We saw how much the calf injury affected Joe Burrow last year. It took him several weeks for him to get right. So, and then running backs, I mean, they're running even more. So that injury really does concern me.
And then if the injury does kind of hamper him long term, and you spend $70 for him, you're talking about 70 out of 200 is allocated to one player, and that player might not even be available for your team. That's a tough sell.
Yeah, it really is. Well, like you said, I mean, there's some safer guys that you can get for $10, $15 cheaper that is still finished right up there at the top running backs.
And that does it for this episode where we talked about you. Yes, you. You are going to be able to dominate your auction draft by some of these tips. We hope that they will be helpful for you. If you have other questions, put in the comments below, or you're welcome to reach out to us on X. We're happy to give you our assistance. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.